Hello boys and girls. Today on social studies for primary exit exams, we're going to look at the East Indians and the Chinese life on the Jamaican plantation. This is part one in a series of 2 parts on plantation life. Our objectives by the end of this lesson, each student should be able to 1. Gather information from multiple sources using the origin to guide selection. 2. Describe the life of Chinese and East Indian immigrants on the plantation from the 19th century to the 20th century. 3. Describe the relationship between East Indians, Chinese, Europeans, and Africans in the post-emancipation period. Now, the selection of the Chinese and the East Indians to come to the Caribbean. They chose the poorer set of people from China and India to come here. They came here for a better life. The Chinese and the East Indians came here by boat from the Asian continent. The Indians came here from 1845 to 1917. The Chinese came here from 1849 onwards to 1917. And the Chinese came here via the Panama Canal. The Indians under the Indian immigration scheme, or what you will learn in your high school time, known as the Metayar scheme, began in 1845 and it ended in 1917. Many of the Indians returned home to India, while some stayed here on the plantation to work, and later on, as you'll see in the presentation on screen, some of them became jewelers, some grew rice, some went into being blacksmith, to make iron casts and iron metals needed in certain industries. What did they receive on arrival when they came here? The Indians and the Chinese laborers, they were given 1 suit of clothing, agricultural tools to dig, so they got the hoe and the fork to dig and plant on the plantation, cooking pots. Now, when they got that, how were they transported to the plantation? They were divided into groups of 20 to 40. One was set off by mule carts, and others were sent off on freight trains. Now, the British colonizers just established in the 1800s Jamaica Railway Corporation. And these trains would transport the Indians and the Chinese to Portland, St. Thomas, St. Mary, Clarendon, and Westmoreland. The terms of their contract, they were meant to receive wages, small plots of land, and return passage home when the contract was over. But what actually happened on the plantation life? It was a new form of slavery. The conditions were harsh on the plantation. The Indians just came off a long voyage as the Chinese, because the Chinese came through Panama. Initially, some of the Chinese landed in Panama to work on the Panama Railway, but the conditions were so harsh that when they heard of work in Jamaica, they came to Jamaica, but it was like running from the frying pan to the fire. Wages were low. They were expecting better wages in Jamaica, but they didn't get that. The wages were low. And if they had children over the ages of 5, they were expected to work as well. Many Chinese and Indian migrants attempted to escape from these plantation lives. And when they were captured and returned to the plantations, their contract that initially was a 5-year contract increased to 10 years. 10 years they had to work on the plantation. So if they ran away, they knew what they were getting themselves into. What to do in Jamaica after the contract? Some of the Indians and Chinese, when they completed their contract, for those who stayed in Jamaica, they became jewelers. And we can see in our society today some of those companies continuing. They became blacksmiths, so they went and they made the iron that was needed in building. Some became barbers. Some became money lenders. You must have heard about drop hand from the older generation. That was a game that was played, a game of chance. So we now call our game of chance the lotto. But before the lotto, the Chinese would have what they call a drop hand in the community. You drop a number, but you will never know the number that the Chinaman was playing, because the term that they used for them was the Chinaman. And the Chinaman would play a certain number. He'd tell you, go ahead, state your number, but at the end of it, after a week or a month period, they would actually release the number that they have played, and whoever won that number would win a bag of money. So that happened because you had them setting up shops with that. So the shopkeepers, besides running a regular grocery store, also had the drop on the side. Some of them became farmers, and that's how we have the rice paddy farms in Jamaica that was introduced by both the Indians and Chinese. So in the Old Harbor area, you had rice farms coming up. Some became fishermen. So those were some of the things that they did after the contract. Now, in addition to that, we have to also look at how the natives were receptive to the Indians and the Chinese. The fact that the first group of Chinese that came here came from Hong Kong, and they came via Panama on the ship called the Epsom. How were the Jamaicans receptive to them? The Negro Jamaican was quite skeptical of them at first. Reason being, these people came to take over their jobs that they had on the plantation. The reception of the people of African descent to the Chinese and the Indians wasn't one that was very nice. They viewed them as people who came to take over the jobs that some of them still had on the sugar plantations. So they were partial to them. The Chinese and the Indians initially kept themselves to themselves whilst they were in Jamaica. Some people look at them as being what you call clannish, meaning that they stuck together. And you find that going through history, we still see that happening. But the understanding is that some of them also intermarried. So there are cases in Jamaica today where you find people who might have the surname Lee, Wong, Fong, Kong. They're of a dark complexion, but with Chinese descent. And it's the same thing with Singh. You find some people who are of African descent, but they're really a mixture. So the Chinese culture and the Indian culture continues in our country today. When we look at the Chinese and the Indian influence in our society today, some of the things that we eat, some of the things that we wear, we can see the linkages, and it shows that our motto, out of many one people, shows we have integrated them into our culture. So boys and girls, let us recap. Today in our lesson, we looked at the origins of the Indians and the Chinese coming to Jamaica, and we also looked at their lifestyle and their way of life on the plantation, and the reception that the people of African descent had towards them. Finally, boys and girls, today, some work for you to do at home. Create a storyboard on the plantation life of the indentured laborers in Jamaica. So on this storyboard, you'll write about how the Chinese or the Indians experience plantation life in Jamaica. Now, the next time in social studies, we'll continue in our series looking at people who affected our culture. We thank you. Stay tuned, keep on reading your books and doing the practice questions in the workbooks.